Hello, I'm Filipa Bellette, functional medicine practitioner on a mission to end body burnout for good. So I wanted to do a quick little video all about your SIBO test. So if you've had your consult and you've been prescribed a SIBO test, generally we use the SIBO test company. I really love them. They have lots of helpful resources there. The way that they analyze the test results, very reliable. So I wanted to do a little video on looking at what the test results look like, so that when you do get your test results back and you come back for your initial lab review consult, you already have a bit of an understanding of what we're trying to look at here. I won't go over how to do the test because there's a link in this portal that takes you to SIBO test, where they go over very clearly how to do a breath sample. But basically what we're looking at in the report is, let me screen share my screen here. We're looking at hydrogen producing bacteria, as well as methane producing bacteria. So in the small intestine, so you've got your mouth, then mouth leads to the esophagus, comes down to the stomach, into the small intestine then going into the large intestine, the colon, and out the poo hole if food was traveling down that way. So in the large intestine, if you've heard about the microbiome, you would have, if you've had an initial consult with me already, I talk a lot about the microbiome. In the large intestine, you've got trillions, heaps of bacteria and different microbes in the large intestine. And as long as, you've got a good ratio of the good bugs in comparison to the neutral, potentially pathogenic bugs, everything is good and healthy. SIBO is what occurs when the bacteria from the large intestine travels up into the small intestine. So SIBO stands for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And so it's not necessarily that you've got pathogens in the small intestine. It's more that the bacteria that live in the large intestine have now overgrown and they have taken up camp in your small intestine. And so when you eat your food, instead of the food passing through your small intestine, and maybe there's just a little bit of fermentation with the small amount of bacteria that should be in your small intestine, instead of that happening, what happens, and then the food should travel down into your large intestine, where you get a lot of fermentation from all your good bugs that chew down and eat and absorb the food that you're not absorb, you've already absorbed all your nutrients, but they chew and ferment and produce some really anti-inflammatory byproducts from that fermentation. But what can happen in small SIBO is that if you've got a lot of bugs, bacteria in the small intestine, then when you're eating your food, you can get a lot of fermentation happening in the small intestine. And that will often, like a massive number one symptom for SIBO would be bloating, especially if it occurs within 15 to 30 minutes after eating. If that occurs, like the food would have only had time to kind of travel into the small intestine. It hasn't gotten to the large intestine first. So that's just a really clear signal that, you may have SIBO. I mean, there might be other stuff going on as well, but SIBO may be a big thing. And SIBO, so other symptoms that we commonly see in our practice, other gut issues, often alternating bowel movements, whether that's diarrhea, constipation, or you can have a bit of a mix. Abdominal pain, discomfort, heartburn can be part of that too. And then you can also have a lot of non-gut related symptoms. So I've seen things like weight issues due to SIBO. I have seen fatigue is a very big one. A female hormone, the sex hormone issues is another one. It can absolutely affect your brain health. So, it can lead to mood imbalances, anxiety, overwhelm. And the reason for that, there's many reasons. It's very inflammatory when you've got SIBO. So it can send inflammatory signals up to your brain and to different areas of your body. But what also happens is a lot of don't quote me on this, but about 80% or so of your nutrients get absorbed in your small intestine. So if you've got all this bacteria that is stopping that absorption, it can absolutely affect the whole function of your body, leading to a whole array of symptoms. So I find that people with SIBO are often quite chronically sick not very well people. Rosacea is another big one, and other skin conditions can be connected to SIBO. So this is what the test results look like. So here, hopefully you can see my cursor. We're looking at hydrogen. So that's the gray line, hydrogen producing bacteria. We've also got methane producing bacteria. And then the blue line here just looks at the combined hydrogen and methane, because sometimes the levels aren't quite high enough for hydrogen and methane to be SIBO positive, but when you combine them together, it can show up as SIBO positive. Okay, so on this test result here, yeah, hydrogen should have a rise over, what is it? Let me just jump over here. 20 parts per million. So hydrogen should have a rise of 20 parts per million within the first 100, 120 minutes of the test. And so on this test, you can see this is an example of where hydrogen actually is negative, because the highest that it gets to is 24, but it doesn't happen until later on in the test. And so, you know, that will kind of be considered a bit of like a borderline SIBO, look at what else is going on. However, you can see here for the methane producing bacteria, that is very high. Methane only needs to rise within about 12 parts per million within the first 100, 120 minutes of the test. And if that happens, then you know that you've got a pretty strong case of SIBO, and that would be SIBO positive for methane producing bacteria. You don't need to understand all of this and what you need to do, but I just wanted to give a little bit of a brief overview as to what we're looking at here. Methane producing bacteria or methane dominant SIBO is often connected to things like big things like constipation, people with really bad constipation issues, as well as, you know, especially if it's linked to bloating and abdominal pain and all that sort of stuff as well. It's very common to see methane showing up as positive in SIBO. Another test result here is off the charts. Hydrogen is anyway. So methane, again, you can see that there's a rise of the 12 parts per million within that first part of the test, which is why it has been classified as positive for methane producing bacteria. But you can also see here that the hydrogen, which is this gray zone, went from 9 and shot up at the 40-minute mark to 64. So that means that the bacteria is really high up in the small intestine, and that reflects a very bad overgrowth of SIBO. So anyway, if you're doing the SIBO test, or, you know, maybe you've been prescribed other tests by me, or you chose to only do one after the initial consult, but, you know, I might have chatted to you about SIBO. If you watch this test and you're like, oh, actually, I really want to test SIBO too, feel free to send an email to hello@chrisandphilly.fm, our email address. And we can organize to get that test done for you. But these are the types of things that you will see. If you're SIBO negative, these levels will be very low. They might be quite low throughout the test until maybe the 7th, 8th, 9th mark, and then they might shoot up. That's a normal fermentation pattern that I would see, where the food or the lactulose syrup, which you drink to feed your bacteria, travels through the small intestine, and then it ferments later on in the large intestine. Anyway, hope that was helpful. Let me know if you have any questions.